In this movie, I invite you to explore folders that Visual Studio gives us, you and me. Let's get started. Notice that we have an empty app folder. This folder can be used for file-based databases or other data files, but it's empty in this template. Next, you will notice we have the app start folder. It has a few C# code files in it, which configure the application startup. I'll delve more deeply into each of these in the next video. Next, we have the content folder, which contains static content files, primarily CSS files for the Bootstrap front-end framework, but also one application-specific CSS file called site.css. This template project includes a single controller class called homeController. If we look inside of that class, you can see that it has three different methods: index, about, and contact. Notice that each one of these returns its results using a viewHelper method. We can run this application and you'll see that each of these methods maps to a page in the application, and later on I will show you how the connection is made. Moving on, notice there is a fonts folder with the web fonts that are used by the application's CSS. These are also static content files, so if we wanted to consolidate these with CSS files, we could do that if that made sense. Next is the models folder. Here's where we put all of our model classes, which are the M in the MVC acronym. Later on, we will review using model classes, and when we do, we will add these classes right here. Note that your model classes don't have to be in the models folder. It's just a convenient way to organize your files and a conversion for ASP.NET MVC5 projects. Next, we have the scripts folder, which is more static content files for the site. This time though, it's JavaScript files which are used by the site, mostly Bootstrap and jQuery. Again, these don't have to go in the scripts folder specifically. So if we wanted to consolidate these with CSS and fonts, we could certainly do that. One final folder in the project is the views folder. This is the V in the MVC acronym. Directly under it, you'll notice a couple files including the web config file. If this site is hosted in IIS, this web config file has a special handler called the block view handler that blocks access to view files, so that your views can't be downloaded directly, possibly exposing any secrets in your code to the end user. There is also a viewStart.cs HTML file. All CS HTML files are views that use something called razor syntax, which I'll be delving in more movies to come. The viewStart in the top level folder like this is a place where you can set default settings for all of the views. You'll notice that this one set just one property, the layout property, which we'll talk about more very soon. This setting applies to all of the views in the application unless they override it specifically. Now let's look at the two folders inside the views folder, the home and shared folders. You may have noticed that the home folder name matches the name of the one controller class that we have in this project, the home controller. By conversion, all of the views in the home controller will be under this view/home folder. You can override that, but if you're following the ASP.NET MVC conversion, this is how to be set up by default. The shared folder is a place where you can create views that are used by multiple controllers or views. You can think of this sort of like a shared or global views available throughout your application. The most common use for this is something called a layout, which is a reusable page template, but we'll talk about this in my movies. Now we are down to the last few files in the project template. The first is the fathercon.ico, which is that little icon that appears in the browser's address bar or the bookmarks for your site. The global.asx file is where you can handle application level events. Packages.config is a list of all the NuGet packages in this project. And the web config file has all of the ASP.NET configuration settings, your own configuration settings, like connection strings, and potentially an IIS configuration settings as well.